Okay, we are live. Greetings and good evening, everyone. Pray you're doing well. This is Amuni Israel. Praise be to the Creator for another day of life. We are going to do the Left Project. I didn't realize it was 4 years till I went back and looked and saw it was 4 years. And so I asked, how many people would be interested in the Left Project? I got some good responses. So we're going to try this again, some 4 years later. But what I'm going to do to save my reading voice is on this particular one, Uncle Tom's Cabin, we're going to play the Lever Box recording, and then we're going to have a little discussion. It's kind of like watching the episode together and then discussing. But before I do, for the 4 year anniversary of the Left Project, and if you don't know what the Left Project is, Lev stands for Lift Every Voice. That's what Lev is. And also in Hebrew, the word Lev means heart. So Lift Every Voice Project, that was the name of the project that was started 4 years ago. Let me take you down a quick trip down memory lane while we wait for a few people to come in so that we can give some backstory to this here discussion. Alrighty then. Okay, so I went back and looked up. I'm starting to do so 4 years ago. Oh no, where did it go? Ew. 4 years ago, um, some of the things that I was doing when I actually just first started Left Project here in Florida was featured in the online. No, actually, it was printed as well. It was the print paper and the online paper for the Florida Today. And so, shout out to Jeff from Florida Today. And he was covering Dr. Martin Luther King's um, what has happened since that time of the civil rights movement and how social justice and things of that nature have progressed throughout the time. So as you can see, the date, this is back on January 15th, 2016, which is celebrating of Dr. Martin Luther King. So, and then you have here, over the years, the last few years, Amuna Yisrael has watched as a new generation of social justice advocates march shoulder to shoulder. This is when, let me keep reading, in cities as far flung as Baltimore, Ferguson, and New York, voicing concerns over some old prejudices and perceptions. And then this is when the Black Lives Matter situation was big. But the inspiration, while rooted in Dr. Martin Luther King prophetic call for justice and equality, has moved from the infrastructure of church halls and payphones to the vastness of social media. And I thought at that time, as I still do today, that social media should be used to effect social change and really to reach people in positive ways. And so instead of complaining, I had the big grandiose idea. Instead of complaining every February about only having 28 days, in 2016, I said, hey, why not? Let's go through a whole year of just giving straight attention to matters that will help in us understanding our issues. So this was some 4 years ago. Wow, time flies. With the Black Lives Matter movement, used social media to bring awareness to injustice, and I, like the original idea, said Yisrael. Oh, he was quoting me. A self-help author and social activist who lives in Palm Bay. What you saw with that movement was brought out of something else, but I believe that message went political. So he was asking me some questions concerning Black Lives Matter, and we all know how the conversation went left quickly after, it gained some steam. And this is me telling them about the Left Project, I believe. So let's just do a little clicky thing here. We were at the Essence of Knowledge bookstore.
The Coolest Law Group really engaged
Oh
with
man, so they
us
good for
as
the
human
ads, boy.
beings.
Hold on, busting an ad on us. Just to give you some backstory, give people some time to come in before we get into this. What happened to the video? It got stuck. Looks like it got stuck. But basically, the video is me talking about the Left Project, um, and I think it actually gets some video of me reading at that time. I think it was Charles Ball. We were reading a narrative at that time. So with that said, that's just some backstory on, here it is. The multimedia approach continues among activists today. He was quoting someone else. It says Yisrael, who developed a love of art and the computer during college, believes more must be done to ensure that social media is used as a positive tool for interaction and healing and not just promoting simple messages. And then, quote, it should be used to have outreach and to reach those in need, end quote, said the mother of four who is hosting Lift Every Voice. That's the Left Project. Shout out Left Project. An online reading of slave narratives that will have a worldwide audience online. Hopefully, this will all lead to reawakening, but we still need to get back to history. We should speak out, use it to edify and not to crush. And that was me speaking 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago. I would say the same thing 10 years ago, too. But speaking 4 years ago, when we first kicked off the Left Project, actually on January 1st. So, how befitting is it, even though a lot of things have happened since then, how befitting. This is a picture here. This is me. Babies, look how small they look. This is me reading, I think it was Charles Ball. Yep, it was 50 Years in Chains. Yep. All right, y'all. So let's get into that. That's just a little trip down memory lane. Yep, trip down memory lane. Hold on, let me go back to. That's for those who may think we are new to this conversation. That's sometimes we gotta hello. We're not new to this conversation. We didn't just jump on this bandwagon because somebody said that there was a check in the mail, or that wasn't the issue at all. Jason Epps, thanks for joining us. 4 years of good work. All praise be to the Creator. We keep it pushing. So we're going to, just to save my voice, because I learned 4 years ago that if I read every single narrative, my voice is going to be done. So what we're going to do is listen to the Lever Box recording. Everybody listen attentively, and then you can put your thoughts as it's going along, and then we'll have a little discourse out along the way. So that's just a little look back. We was repping on the front line for the Lev Project, and I was saddened 4 years ago because the response wasn't, the response was like, ain't nobody trying to hear that. And I'm like, man, that's messed up. But anyway, we're going to keep it pushing. I just read all by my little lonesome. It's all good. All right, let's go. Let's get it. How many people have read Uncle Tom's Cabin? Let me know. I personally didn't read Uncle Tom's Cabin before. I know a lot of times people talk about, you being an Uncle Tom and this, that, and the third. And I remember my older brother told me years ago that, there's a misconception about Uncle Tom. And a lot of the stereotypes, like we read, that the Mammy stereotype and the Uncle Tom stereotype comes from Uncle Tom's Cabin. So it's a long book, but understand that this book is what set the stage. This is the pre-Civil War book. According to some of the quotes, the President Lincoln says to Harriet Beecher Stowe, "Oh, this is the lady who started the war." So basically, when this book sold, I think it was, what did I say, over 300,000 copies at that time. It was a bestseller next to the Bible, second best-selling book, and it cemented in the minds of the people a lot of things as it related to slavery. So let's get it. We're only going to do chapter 1 today, and every day that I'm able to come on around this time of night, when we come back from the shop, then we're going to do a chapter until we get through it. All right? Alrighty then.
LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Volume 1, Chapter 1, in which the reader is introduced to a man of humanity. Late in the afternoon of a chilly day in February, two gentlemen were sitting alone over their wine in a well-furnished dining parlor in the town of P. in Kentucky. There were no servants present, and the gentlemen, with chairs closely approaching, seemed to be discussing some subject with great earnestness. For convenience' sake, we have said hitherto two gentlemen. One of the parties, however, when critically examined, did not seem, strictly speaking, to come under the species. He was a short, thick-set man with coarse, commonplace features, and that swaggering air of pretension which marks a low man who is trying to elbow his way upward in the world. He was much overdressed, in a gaudy vest of many colors, a blue neckerchief, bedropped gaily with yellow spots, and arranged with a flaunting tie, quite in keeping with the general air of the man. His hands, large and coarse, were plentifully bedecked with rings, and he wore a heavy gold watch-chain with a bundle of seals of portentous size and a great variety of colors attached to it, which, in the ardor of conversation, he was in the habit of flourishing and jingling with evident satisfaction. His conversation was in free and easy defiance of Murray's grammar, English Grammar, 1795, by Lindley Murray, 1745 to 1826, the most authoritative American grammarian of his day, and was garnished at convenient intervals with various profane expressions, which not even the desire to be graphic in our account shall induce us to transcribe. His companion, Mr. Shelby, had the appearance of a gentleman, and the arrangements of the house and the general air of the housekeeping indicated easy and even opulent circumstances. As we before stated, the two were in the midst of an earnest conversation. "That is the way I should arrange the matter," said Mr. Shelby. "I can't make trade that way, I positively can't, Mr. Shelby," said the other, holding up a glass of wine between his eye and the light. "Why, the fact is, Haley, Tom is an uncommon fellow. He is certainly worth that sum anywhere, steady, honest, capable, manages my whole farm like a clock." "You mean honest as niggers go," said Haley, helping himself to a glass of brandy. "No, I mean really, Tom is a good, steady, sensible, pious fellow. He got religion at a camp meeting 4 years ago, and I believe he really did get it. I've trusted him since then with everything I have, money, house, horses, and let him come and go round the country, and I always found him true and square in everything." "Some folks don't believe there is pious niggers, Shelby," said Haley, with a candid flourish of his hand. "But I do. I had a fellow, now, in this yer last lot I took to Orleans. 'Twas as good as a meetin', now, really, to hear that critter pray, and he was quite gentle and quiet-like. He fetched me a good sum, too, for I bought him cheap of a man that was obliged to sell out, so I realized 600 on him. Yes, I consider religion a valuable thing in a nigger, when it's the genuine article, and no mistake." "Well, Tom's got the real article, if ever a fellow had," rejoined the other. "Why, last fall I let him go to Cincinnati alone to do business for me and bring home $500. 'Tom,' says I to him, 'I trust you because I think you're a Christian. I know you wouldn't cheat.' Tom comes back, sure enough. I knew he would. Some low fellows, they say, said to him, 'Tom, why don't you make tracks for Canada?' Master trusted me, and I couldn't. They told me about it. I am sorry to part with Tom, I must say. You ought to let him cover the whole balance of the debt, and you would, Haley, if you had any conscience." "Well, I've got just as much conscience as any man in business can afford to keep. Just a little, you know, to swear by, as 'twere," said the trader jocularly. "And then I'm ready to do anything in reason to oblige friends, but this, you see, is a leetle too hard on a fellow, a leetle too hard." The trader sighed contemplatively and poured out some more brandy. "Well then, Haley, how will you trade?" said Mr. Shelby after an uneasy interval of silence. "Well, haven't you a boy or gal that you could throw in with Tom?" None that I could well spare. To tell the truth, it's only hard necessity makes me willing to sell at all. I don't like parting with any of my hands, that's fact." Here the door opened, and a small quadroon boy, between 4 and 5 years of age, entered the room. There was something in his appearance remarkably beautiful and engaging. His black hair, fine as floss silk, hung in glossy curls about his round, dimpled face, while a pair of large, dark eyes, full of fire and softness, looked out from beneath the rich, long lashes as he peered curiously into the apartment. A gay robe of scarlet and yellow plaid, carefully made and neatly fitted, set off to advantage the dark and rich style of his beauty, and a certain comic air of assurance, blended with bashfulness, showed that he had been not unused to being petted and noticed by his master. "Hello, Jim Crow," said Mr. Shelby, whistling and snapping a bunch of raisins towards him. "Pick that up now." The child scampered with all his little strength after the prize, while his master laughed. "Come here, Jim Crow," said he. The child came up, and the master patted the curly head and chucked him under the chin. "Now, Jim, show this gentleman how you can dance and sing." The boy commenced one of those wild, grotesque songs common among the Negroes, in a rich, clear voice, accompanying his singing with many comic evolutions of the hands, feet, and whole body, in all perfect time to the music. "Bravo!" said Haley, throwing him a quarter of an orange. "Now, Jim, walk like old Uncle Cudjoe when he has the rheumatism," said his master. Instantly the flexible limbs of the child assumed the appearance of deformity and distortion as, with his back humped up and his master's stick in his hand, he hobbled about the room, his childish face drawn into a doleful pucker, and spitting from right to left in imitation of an old man. Both gentlemen laughed uproariously. "Now, Jim," said his master, "show us how old Elder Robbins leads the psalm." The boy drew his chubby face down to a formidable length and commenced toning a psalm tune through his nose with imperturbable gravity. "Hurrah! Bravo! What a young'un!" said Haley. "That chap's a case, I'll promise. Tell you what," he said, suddenly clapping his hand on Mr. Shelby's shoulder, "fling in that chap, and I'll settle the business, I will. Come, now, if that ain't doing the thing up about the rightest." At this moment the door was pushed gently open, and a young quadroon woman, apparently about 25, entered the room. There needed only a glance from the child to her to identify her as its mother. There was the same rich, full, dark eye with its long lashes, the same ripples of silky black hair. The brown of her complexion gave way on the cheek to a perceptible flush, which deepened as she saw the gaze of the strange man fixed upon her in bold and undisguised admiration. Her dress was of the neatest possible fit, and set off to advantage her finely molded shape. A delicately formed hand and a trim foot and ankle were items of appearance that did not escape the quick eye of the trader, well used to run up at a glance the points of a fine female article. "Well, Eliza?" said her master, as she stopped and looked hesitatingly at him. "I was looking for Harry, please, sir." And the boy bounded toward her, showing his spoils, which he had gathered in the skirt of his robe. "Well, take him away, then," said Mr. Shelby, and hastily she withdrew, carrying the child on her arm. "By Jupiter," said the trader, turning to him in admiration, "there's an article, now. You might make your fortune on that our gal in New Orleans any day. I've seen over 1,000 in my day paid down for gals not a bit handsomer." "I don't want to make my fortune on her," said Mr. Shelby dryly, and seeking to turn the conversation, he uncorked a bottle of fresh wine and asked his companion's opinion of it. "Capital, sir, first chop," said the trader. Then, turning and slapping his hand familiarly on Shelby's shoulder, he added, "Come, how will you trade about the gal? What shall I say for her? What'll you take?" "Mr. Haley, she is not to be sold," said Shelby. "My wife would not part with her for her weight in gold." Aye. Women always say such things, 'cause they hadn't no sort of calculation. Just show 'em how many watches, feathers, and trinkets one's weight in gold would buy, and that alters the case, I reckon. "I tell you, Haley, this must not be spoken of. I say no, and I mean no," said Shelby decidedly. "Well, you'll let me have the boy, though," said the trader. "You must own I've come down pretty handsomely for him." "What on earth can you want with the child?" said Shelby. "Why, I've got a friend that's going into this yar branch of the business. Wants to buy up handsome boys to raise for the market. Fancy articles entirely. Sell for waiters and so on to rich uns that can pay for handsome ones. It sets off one of your great places, a real handsome boy to open door, wait, and tend. They fetch a good sum, and this little devil is such a comical musical concern, he's just the article." "I would rather not sell him," said Mr. Shelby thoughtfully. "The fact is, sir, I'm a humane man, and I hate to take the boy from his mother, sir." "Oh, you do? La, yes, something of that natter. I understand perfectly. It is mighty unpleasant getting on with women sometimes. I allus hates these yar screechin', screamin' times. They are mighty unpleasant. But as I manages business, I generally avoids 'em, sir. Now, what if you get the girl off for a day or a week or so? Then the thing's done quietly, all over before she comes home. Your wife might get her some earrings or a new gown or some such truck to make up with her. I'm afraid not. Lor bless you, yes, these critters ain't like white folks, you know. They gets over things, only manage right. Now, they say, said Haley, assuming a candid and confidential air, that this kind of trade is hardening to the feelings, but I never found it so. Fact is, I never could do things up the way some fellers manage the business. I've seen 'em as would pull a woman's child out of her arms and set him up to sell, and she's screeching like mad all the time. Very bad policy. Damages the article. Makes 'em quite unfit for service sometimes. I knew a real handsome gal once in Orleans as was entirely ruined by this sort of handling. The fellow that was trading for her didn't want her baby, and she was one of your real high sort when her blood was up. I tell you, she squeezed up her child in her arms and talked and went on real awful. It kinder makes my blood run cold to think of it. And when they carried off the child and locked her up, she just went raving mad and died in a week. Clear waste, sir, of $1,000 just for want of management. There's where 'tis. It's always best to do the humane thing, sir. That's been my experience. And the trader leaned back in his chair and folded his arm with an air of virtuous decision, apparently considering himself a second Wilberforce. The subject appeared to interest the gentleman deeply, for while Mr. Shelby was thoughtfully peeling an orange, Haley broke out afresh, with becoming diffidence, but as if actually driven by the force of truth to say a few words more. It don't look well now for a feller to be praising himself, but I say it just because it's the truth. I believe I'm reckoned to bring in about the finest droves of niggers that is brought in. At least I've been told so. If I have once, I reckon I have 100 times, all in good case, fat and likely, and I lose as few as any man in the business. And I lays it all to my management, sir, and humanity, sir, I may say, is the great pillar of my management. Mr. Shelby did not know what to say, and so he said, "Indeed." Now, I've been laughed at for my notions, sir, and I've been talked to. They ain't popular, and they ain't common, but I stuck to 'em, sir. I've stuck to 'em, and realized well on 'em. Yes, sir, they have paid their passage, I may say. And the trader laughed at his joke. There was something so piquant and original in these elucidations of humanity that Mr. Shelby could not help laughing in company. Perhaps you laugh too, dear reader, but you know humanity comes out in a variety of strange forms nowadays, and there is no end to the odd things that humane people will say and do. Mr. Shelby's laugh encouraged the trader to proceed. It's strange now, but I never could beat this into people's heads. Now, there was Tom Loker, my old partner, down in Natchez. He was a clever fellow, Tom was, only the very devil with niggers. On principle 'twas, you see, for a better-hearted feller never broke bread. 'Twas his system, sir. I used to talk to Tom. Why, Tom, I used to say, when your gals take on and cry, what's the use of cracking on 'em over the head and knocking on 'em round? It's ridiculous, says I, and don't do no sort of good. Why, I don't see no harm in their crying, says I. It's nater, says I, and if nater can't blow off one way, it will another. Besides, Tom, says I, it just spiles your gals. They get sickly and down in the mouth, and sometimes they gets ugly, particularly yallow gals do, and it's the devil and all getting on 'em broke in. Now, says I, why can't you kinder coax 'em up and speak 'em fair? Depend on it, Tom, a little humanity thrown in along goes a heap further than all your jawing and cracking, and it pays better, says I. Depend on it. But Tom couldn't get the hang on it, and he spiled so many for me that I had to break off with him, though he was a good-hearted fellow and as fair a business hand as is going. And do you find your ways of managing do the business better than Tom's? Said Mr. Shelby. Why, yes, sir, I may say so. You see, when I anyways can, I takes a leetle care about the unpleasant parts, like sellin' young'uns and that. Get the gals out of the way, out of sight, out of mind, you know. And when it's clean done and can't be helped, they naturally gets used to it. 'Tain't, you know, as if it was white folks that's brought up in the way of 'spected to keep their children and wives and all that. Niggers, you know, that's fetched up properly, han't no kind of spectations of no kind, so all these things comes easier.
I'm going to put a little pause right here for those who just joined us. Welcome to the discussion. We are listening to halfway through the first chapter of Uncle Tom's Cabin backstory. We'll touch on that again. I touched on that before. If you have any questions and commentary as you go along, because trigger alert, a lot of this conversation is triggering. It was written in the early 1800s. That was the language that people were using just to set up the scene of what's happening. Jason said Tom, no, Tom is actually the prized enslaved individual of Shelby. So essentially what's going on is that there's a scene where this gaudy, bling bling dressed trader comes to check Shelby about his debts, just like we read about yesterday about the first of the January being where people come and collect debts. It doesn't specifically say it's the first of January, but just we can get the picture. The trader, a lot of times people mortgaged slaves, they got loans for slaves, and so here comes the slave trader coming to check Shelby, that's his name, for his debts. Shelby has no money to pay him. Usually the thought is that if you have hands, then you're going to produce product, and you produce product, then you're going to sell that market, and you sell that market and you get your money. Well, Shelby is in debt, and he has to sell the the slave body that's going to get him the most money. And so because Tom is so well trusted, Tom is actually that person. And so he's trying to, it's like somebody trying to see what can I hack. Somebody might hack their diamond ring, or they might hack their engagement, or they might hack whatever, go to the pawn shop to get the highest bid. So that's what he's doing right now. And so as he's talking, this young boy comes in. They say he's a quadroon. So, he's the son of a person who was raped and enslaved. And so the first thing he does is telling him, like, yo, entertain us. So this is the same thing that's happening today. Your value is in how you can make me laugh. Sing for us, dance for us, be a monkey for us, entertain us. And so the man turns around and says, if you throw him in, then I forget all your debts. I wipe it clean. And then he's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? So he's having this conversation about how melanated people don't feel like what so-called white people do. And they don't, and this stuff is not, this stuff is what Harriet Beecher Stowe is doing, is sharing some of the thoughts that were present in that day. Like, for instance, Thomas Jefferson, I don't have my books right now because they're packed up, but Thomas Jefferson goes into Negroes are different physiologically than European people, emotionally than them. They don't feel. So this is what many Europeans were thinking. They don't feel like so-called white people do. They don't think like white people do. They don't need the same things. They don't need sleep. All of these things were thought processes that were passed around during that day. And so this slave trader is trying to make it like, he's humane by saying, I don't snatch the babies when the mother's looking, because then that's going to cause too much problem and stress for me. I snatch them when they're not looking, so that they can get over it. And so he's having this conversation about how some slave traders would snatch the baby and the mother would hold on, and it will cause this grief, and then the worker is what you hired, what you stole her for, will be of no use. And so that's kind of where we are right now. You are going to hear some triggering things, but I think it's helpful and beneficial in the story, so we can see the points of injury that happened along the way. Queen T said he felt we didn't really feel physically or emotionally. Correct. Thomas Jefferson's talked about that. What's his name? The crazy man, Samuel Cartwright. What's his name? Oh no, not Cartwright. Is that Cartwright? The crazy man who went around talking about drapetomania. You know what I mean? He. Now you're gonna make me try to get his name. Whew. That's why it's just gonna be one chapter a day, because this it can be heavy. Hold on, drop. Tomania. Yeah. I think his name was Cartwright. Yeah, Samuel Cartwright. That was his name. This crazy so-called American physician named Samuel Cartwright was going around from plantation to plantation telling the slave owners that the reason why Africans or melanated people was fleeing was because they had a mental condition. And he goes into this whole thing about uh, what you can do to cure them of their desire to be free. And that was Samuel Cartwright, and that's a real story. So there were a lot of theories that were being developed around that time as to how to deal with and to explain away the fact that you weren't resigned to your estate. You weren't glad that you were feeling this way. You weren't excited for the benevolence of your master. Like, this is the thought. Like, you should be okay. You should be all right. I'm helping you. You see what I'm saying? But he is conflicted in the story. And let's get back to the story. Shelby, that's his name, he's conflicted, this slave master, because he prided himself on not separating slaves. And because Sam has been so good to him, he doesn't really want to sell him, but he feels like he has to. So then we're going to continue.
I'm afraid mine are not properly brought up, then, said Mr. Shelby. S'pose not. You Kentucky folks spile your niggers. You mean well by 'em, but 'tain't no real kindness after all. Now, a nigger, you see, what's got to be hacked and tumbled around the world and sold to Tom and Dick and the Lord knows who, 'tain't no kindness to be given on him notions and expectations and bringing on him up too well, for the rough and tumble comes all the harder on him arter. Now, I venture to say your niggers would be quite chop-fallen in a place where some of your plantation niggers would be singing and whooping like all possessed. Every man, you know, Mr. Shelby, naturally thinks well in his own ways, and I think I treat niggers just about as well as it's ever worth while to treat 'em. It's a happy thing to be satisfied, said Mr. Shelby with a slight shrug, and some perceptible feelings of a disagreeable nature. Well, said Haley, after they had both silently picked their nuts for a season, what do you say? I'll think the matter over and talk with my wife, said Mr. Shelby. Meantime, Haley, if you want the matter carried on in the quiet way you speak of, you'd best not let your business in this neighborhood be known. It will get out among my boys, and it will not be a particularly quiet business getting away any of my fellows, if they know it, I'll promise you. Oh, certainly, by all means, Mum, of course. But I'll tell you, I'm in a devil of a hurry, and shall want to know as soon as possible what I may depend on, said he, rising and putting on his overcoat. Well, call up this evening between 6 and 7, and you shall have my answer, said Mr. Shelby, and the trader bowed himself out of the apartment. I'd like to have been able to kick the fellow down the steps, said he to himself as he saw the door fairly closed, with his impudent assurance, but he knows how much he has me at advantage. If anybody had ever said to me that I should sell Tom down south to one of those rascally traders, I should have said, is thy servant a dog that he should do this thing? And now it must come, for aught I see, and Eliza's child, too. I know that I shall have some fuss with wife about that, and for that matter about Tom, too. So much for being in debt. Hey, ho! The fellow sees his advantage and means to push it. Perhaps the mildest form of the system of slavery is to be seen in the state of Kentucky. The general prevalence of agricultural pursuits of a quiet and gradual nature, not requiring those periodic seasons of hurry and pressure that are called for in the business of more southern districts, makes the task of the Negro a more healthful and reasonable one, while the master, content with a more gradual style of acquisition, has not those temptations to hard-heartedness which always overcome frail human nature when the prospect of sudden and rapid gain is weighed in the balance, with no heavier counterpoise than the interests of the helpless and unprotected. Whoever visits some estates there and witnesses the good-humored indulgence of some masters and mistresses, and the affectionate loyalty of some slaves, might be tempted to dream the oft-fabled poetic legend of a patriarchal institution and all that. But over and above the scene there broods a portentous shadow, the shadow of law. So long as the law considers all these human beings with beating hearts and living affections only as so many things belonging to a master, so long as the failure or misfortune or imprudence or death of the kindest owner may cause them any day to exchange a life of kind protection and indulgence for one of hopeless misery and toil, so long it is impossible to make anything beautiful or desirable in the best regulated administration of slavery. Mr. Shelby was a fair, average kind of man, good-natured and kindly, and disposed to easy indulgence of those around him, and there had never been a lack of anything which might contribute to the physical comfort of the negroes on his estate. He had, however, speculated largely and quite loosely, had involved himself deeply, and his notes, to a large amount, had come into the hands of Haley, and this small piece of information is the key to the preceding conversation. Now, it had so happened that, in approaching the door, Eliza had caught enough of the conversation to know that a trader was making offers to her master for somebody. She would gladly have stopped at the door to listen as she came out, but her mistress just then calling, she was obliged to hasten away. Still, she thought she heard the trader make an offer for her boy. Could she be mistaken? Her heart swelled and throbbed, and she involuntarily strained him so tight that the little fellow looked up into her face in astonishment. "Eliza, girl, what ails you today?" said her mistress, when Eliza had upset the wash-pitcher, knocked down the workstand, and finally was abstractedly offering her mistress a long nightgown in place of the silk dress she had ordered her to bring from the wardrobe. Eliza started. "Oh, missus," she said, raising her eyes. Then, bursting into tears, she sat down in a chair and began sobbing. "Why, Eliza, child, what ails you?" said her mistress. "Oh, missus," said Eliza, "there's been a trader talking with master in the parlor. I heard him." "Well, silly child, suppose there was." "Oh, missus, do you suppose master would sell my Harry?" And the poor creature threw herself into a chair and sobbed convulsively. "Sell him? No, you foolish girl. You know your master never deals with those southern traders, and never means to sell any of his servants as long as they behave well. Why, you silly child, who do you think would want to buy your Harry? Do you think all the world are set on him as you are, you goosey? Come, cheer up and hook my dress. There now, put my back hair up in that pretty braid you learnt the other day, and don't go listening at doors any more." "Well, but, missus, you never would give your consent to... "Nonsense, child. To be sure I shouldn't. What do you talk so for? I would as soon have one of my own children sold. But really, Eliza, you are getting altogether too proud of that little fellow. A man can't put his nose into the door, but you think he must be coming to buy him." Reassured by her mistress's confident tone, Eliza proceeded nimbly and adroitly with her toilet, laughing at her own fears as she proceeded. Mrs. Shelby was a woman of high class, both intellectually and morally. To that natural magnanimity and generosity of mind which one often marks as characteristic of the women of Kentucky, she added high moral and religious sensibility and principle, carried out with great energy and ability into practical results. Her husband, who made no professions to any particular religious character, nevertheless reverenced and respected the consistency of hers, and stood perhaps a little in awe of her opinion. Certain it was that he gave her unlimited scope in all her benevolent efforts for the comfort, instruction, and improvement of her servants, though he never took any decided part in them himself. In fact, if not exactly a believer in the doctrine of the efficiency of the extra good works of saints, he really seemed somehow or other to fancy that his wife had piety and benevolence enough for two, to indulge a shadowy expectation of getting into heaven through her superabundance of qualities to which he made no particular pretension. The heaviest load on his mind after his conversation with the trader lay in the foreseen necessity of breaking to his wife the arrangement contemplated, meeting the importunities and opposition which he knew he should have reason to encounter. Mrs. Shelby, being entirely ignorant of her husband's embarrassments, and knowing only the general kindliness of his temper, had been quite sincere in the entire incredulity with which she had met Eliza's suspicions. In fact, She dismissed the matter from her mind without a second thought, and being occupied in preparations for an evening visit, it passed out of her thoughts entirely. End of chapter 1.
All right, y'all. End of chapter one. Chapter one was heavy. That was a interesting introduction into this narrative. Um, we had some questions. Feel free to put your thoughts in the box. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna chop it up, save my reading voice, listen to this what is it called? Common domain here, so there should be no copyright problems. And yeah, we're gonna make our way through this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. So let me just give a little backstory, and then I'm gonna come look real quick. Uncle Tom's Cabin. I think I gave a summary before, but I'll do it again. It was published in 1852. It was an anti-slavery novel by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I believe her peoples were abolitionists. Okay, and so she pulled later on, after we finish this, we can take a look at the keys of Uncle Tom's Cabin, because what happens is a lot of people in the South started to push back, like, no, that didn't really happen. You're making it up. And so she goes on to show that the keys to Uncle Tom's Cabin is that she pulled a lot of the inspiration from for these characters, like the real, and I actually read it this last week. The real Uncle Tom was the name of a person named Josiah Henson. And so she pulled a lot of information, from people who already published their narratives. Okay, and then she puts it together. She weaves, like today, in today's space and time, and then they weave it together into, based on truth, or based on nonfiction, but it's fictionalized. And so that's what this is. So far we're not yet introduced to Uncle Tom, except for the fact that he's being spoken about. Eliza's child is in danger also. I think his name is Henry, being in danger of being sold because the Shelby made some business dealings, and it's time to pay the piper. So this is when you were enslaved, you were valuable to the person who enslaved you, and enslaved bodies were used you know, to settle debts. So let's go through some of the questions. I was just typing some of my thoughts. I'm sorry. When I hear this stuff, I just have random thoughts. So please excuse me as I just type the random thoughts in the box so that they won't escape me while I'm going down. So that's what I encourage you to do. Just your thoughts as the story is going along, and then we can touch back because it's so much. It's like a lot. I mean, so if you notice, Tom is not there. Tom has nothing to do with the conversation. Eliza, she's eavesdropping, but she's not asked like, "Hey, Eliza, what do you think about me selling your child?" So this is a helplessness that many melanated people have getting to a space of learned helplessness, where you come to the point where you think that it doesn't matter what you do because nothing's going to change anyway, and that comes from the trauma of having real life things affected or decisions made in your life without your consent or your ancestors' consent. So yeah, the a lot of conscious community likes to say this, that the religion is something that the slave master used to manipulate the minds of the Negro to make him a quote good Negro, make him benign, so that he doesn't retaliate against you. So that was brought up in this discussion or this first chapter. You're always looked at as your capability to work. So he's calling melanated people hands. I already talked about being used as, laughing stock. Jason, whose perspective it is, it's a European writing. In the beginning, I would say there was one European woman. If you listen back to the Left Project, anytime I read her, my blood would boil just by the way in which she referenced people. But then after a while, it took 4 years, right? It took me some time to be able to even begin to stomach the way in which our foreparents were referenced, just thought of, names that they were called, like that book. I forgot her name too. It's packed up. Anytime I read that woman, I would be on level 10 because You're calling people like imps. I had to go and look up what an imp, all of these disparaging terms to make yourself feel elevated over someone else. That was a tactic that was used and still used today. Objectified. So the object, making people into objects. Let's see here. We talked about the character in the book. We talked about not feeling. We talked about the class system too, or we didn't. The classification. He brings up yellow gals, and it's basically saying those whose bloodlines have been watered down or they've been accosted by the slave master, and now they are quote prettier. But basically, what they're saying is that they don't stand up as much as those who are directly from the continent. So he kind of slid that in there that even the quadroon young boy and the yellow gals and the slave traders having that discussion, which still goes on today. This separation of skin color and what it means, these stereotypes. Mm. And yeah, Jason, it's like somebody parting with something that they really don't want to, not necessarily for the sake of the thing, but how they feel about that thing. And in this case, that thing is Tom. Which Tom is a person, so I don't know how he's a thing, but And then we have, let's go down here. We have Kev who says a lot of melanated women or black women have internalized that showing emotion is a weakness. Yeah, well, she tried to show emotion. Let's just look at the lies in this situation. The European woman, first of all, the story is she's going through a lot of pains to try to show that these are, quote, benevolent slave masters, right? They're so lovely to their slaves. They give them everything they can. They, they don't really want to do this. They go through great pains. And so even in the narrative, Eliza is she's emotional, and she's being treated like someone would treat a child, like, oh, you tripping, just go ahead and sit down, relax, you silly, get back to work, basically is what I heard. Put that braid in my hair the way I like it. That's what I heard. And so after generations of showing that emotions is weakness, then you no longer can show emotions, because even in this situation, the Miss Shelby says to her, oh, you're becoming too proud of that boy. You know what I mean? That boy is beginning to mean too much to you. You're beginning to get uppity. You're starting to feel yourself a little bit. You know what I mean? So all of these thoughts of, I have to hide how I really feel, I have to not show what I really feel, because if I do that, then they can use this against me. It's a very real and present uh, issue that was happening then and kind of now still happening to a certain degree. We spoke about that. Jason asks, is the Southern trader like a trader like stocks? Well, yeah, I mean, people was commodities, buy low and sell high. I think, like I said, I think it's the former. They weren't slave owners, they were slave traders. So, yeah, he's talking about who he usually trades and where he gets them from and his practices and this, that, and the third. So, yep, it's heavy. So I learned from the last time. So I'm not going to give too much in one night. I'm just going to do chapter 1. Eliza was your grandmother's name? Oh, wow. Oh, wow. See there? We're going to see a lot. I'm just going to warn you guys. Yeah, disconnect your feelings from your child. Only rear the child. Only overtly give the child correction and have an issue showing the child love. This is what it. I'm gonna beat you. I'm gonna da 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 da. Because guess what? If you go out amongst the slave master and he sees this, yes, Deuteronomy 28, correct. You see, when you read, a lot of people have beef with the scriptures, but when you read what it's saying, what happened, and you read what happened, you cannot you cannot say that it didn't say that. It really does. And that's kind of what also this took me on this path to not only just saying it in concept, but actually going in and pulling out these stories and being able to say, this is like some of the things verbatim our foreparents and our ancestors said that that the text said they would say. You know what I mean? If it's night, they would it was day, and when it was day, they would it was night. All the things, a lot of the things that the text says, they actually said. And when I'm reading it, I'm like, wow. Jason says, do you think this has anything to do with the tendency of Black Americans to kick their child? out at the House of 18. A lot of things. I think we're gonna cover, even in this story and others. I think we're gonna uncover the basis, the root of a lot of thought processes. That's what I think is gonna happen. That's what has happened for me. That it's like I have to carry you concerning Jason's question. It's like, remember, many of these people at that time, because there's something that happens after that time, right? You have the Reconstruction, you have, Jim Crow era, you have civil rights. So there are things that happen after that time, but we're just looking at the injury. And during this injury, the longer that you are, for like, it's different for the young woman than it is for the young man. And we have to also look at, not that when the young woman comes of a certain age, and Harriet Jacobs speaks of this. Harriet Jacobs speaks of when the woman comes of a certain age, she becomes prey. She's not safe because she's going to be exploited because the fact that she is a young woman. You know what I mean? And the young man, he's going to be exploited in another way. And so for both of them, they go into this, not even really a rite of passage, but it is for this slave time. They go into these things that is to be expected. And the parents try to steer them in a way to kind of shelter them from whatever it is they know they're going to experience. So as we go on to see what was the thought of the day, then we could kind of like, unravel some of these things that, like Jason's asking some of these questions. Uh, Yeah, the rule is I can't maintain you. I'm hardly maintaining myself for me, right? The rule is I can hardly, it's a burden. So, in many cultures, children are a blessing, right? They look for the children. If you get married, the parents want you to get married after a certain age, and they're looking for children. So, like a lot of West African culture, you look Nigerian movies, Ghanaian movies, a lot of West African culture, they're like, where are my grandchildren? They're looking for children. If you were in this culture, this that was produced through this oppression within slavery, your children, although they were a joy, was also seen as a burden, because they're going to bring pain to you, they're going to bring discomfort to you. You cannot protect them, you cannot provide for them, and they're under the jurisdiction of someone else. There's some people today who have children without having the support of a relationship and family, and it's like, yo, the minute you can stand on your foot, you need to go out there and stand on your foot, because I can't manage you. And for many parents, even these the younger grandparents who are now like grandparents by 35, grandparents by 40, they're like, oh, I'm gonna go live my best life now. It's been real. So a lot of people, uh, yeah, other cultures, many generations live in the same house, so that you'll have the grandparents there, you'll have the working parents there, you'll have the young children there. But because of many things, the breaking of the family structure, the burden that people feel that children are to them, it's like once you can stand on your foot, and 18 is not for nobody to be standing on their feet. They still children, they still babies, they don't know nothing. Not to be able to go out there and stand on their feet and then make it. Like they're not ready yet. Like their wings are not even ready to flap yet. And so that's crazy. But this is what this society does. Push you out the nest early so that you just get stuck in the matrix. That's just my thought. Once you push them out the nest early, then you go into debt. You stuck in the matrix, and then we got you. Got them. Got them. So that's chapter 1. Join us again for chapter 2. Tell us how you like it. Give us feedback. We're going to come back for chapter 2. What's today? Today's Wednesday. Okay. I'm going to try to come back for chapter 2 tomorrow. Tell your mama, tell your friends. We're going to have this conversation. We're going to do it nice and slow. And leave your comments and your questions in the box below. And we'll come back again. All right. Everybody have a blessed night. And I'm gonna try to keep it. What time is it? I said it. One. I'll be trying not to pin myself down, because if I do, then I'll be like all stressed, like, oh, I didn't get there at 9 o'clock. But I'm gonna try to do it around this time. What is it, like 9? I started like around 9 o'clock. If 9 o'clock is a good time, let me see what time is it. It's going to 10. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's 9:55. So around 9 o'clock, we should be able to do it around 9 o'clock. Blessings, Queen T. Thanks for coming through. Kev, thanks for coming through. Jason, everybody, thanks for coming through. We'll see you again tomorrow. Most I will. All right?